Hey, welcome everyone. We'll be getting started in just a moment. All right, well, let's go ahead and kick things off. Welcome everyone. My name is Dan Jeline. I'm with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. I'm very excited for you to join us today for today's Office of Safety, FHWA Office of Safety sponsored webinar. You can do it too. We're going to be talking about breaking down institutional barriers that can help us better improve safety for all road users. This webinar is being sponsored by the Focused Approach to Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety, a technical assistance and training effort sponsored by the Office of Safety. So we're delighted to bring our panelists to you and kind of have some conversation around this topic, especially important because as we look to make changes on the road and in our plans and policies, we want to look internally sometimes at what we can do differently within our own organizations. And we're going to share a couple of stories with you today about a couple of states that did just that. Maybe you can learn a bit from their example, and we'll get some discussion going with them a bit later in the webinar. I have a bit of housekeeping to cover with you first. I first want to say that as attendees, you're not going to be able to speak during the webinar today, but you can submit questions and comments as we go. There is a questions pane that will allow you to do just that at any time. We are holding some time at the end of the webinar today for a discussion period, probably a pretty lengthy discussion period, in fact. So we'll be sure to try to answer as many of those questions as we can. Send them in at any time, and we'll prioritize those for later in the discussion period. We are working on posting both the webinar slides and then eventually the recording. They'll be up online at the website you see there. I'll post that in the chat in just a moment so you can have a direct link so you don't miss anything there. We have submitted this webinar and it's been approved by the AICP for 1.5 CM credits. So if you're a planner and those apply to you, you know where to find that information. We're going to be providing you with a link to generate a certificate of attendance for those of you who need to report PDHs and other professional development hours. Look for an email and a link to a post-webinar evaluation survey. Once you complete those questions, then you'll be given the link to prepare or provide your certificate of attendance for the webinar today. So I'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with all of this information, links to the archive page, how to get your CEUs, your certificates, and where to find the recording and all that information. With the webinar today, what we wanted to do is tackle a few different objectives. One of those is to identify potential internal obstacles, barriers, or challenges that are keeping us from making needed improvements to enhance non-motorized road user safety. We want to be able to learn from agencies that have done this work and figure out what they do to identify these barriers and then overcome them. And then finally, we want to offer a way to understand the steps that are involved in this work so that you can take this lesson and maybe apply it within your own agencies. I want to introduce our panelists that are joining us today. First, we'll hear from Becky Crow, who has worked for the Federal Highway Administration for over 20 years. Ms. Crow came to the Office of Safety in 2005 and has managed multiple safety programs, including road safety audits, motorcycles, older drivers, and several everyday count innovations, including road diets and safe transportation for every pedestrian or step. In addition to these duties, she manages the Focused Approach to Safety for Pedestrians and Bicyclists, where she works directly with states and MPOs around the country. So thank you for joining us today, Becky. Jackie DeWolf is with us as well. She is the Director of Mobility Policy and Program Development at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. In this role, Jackie provides strategic leadership and management to expand the agency's mobility, safety, and resiliency work. She leads a new program management team responsible for modernization, capital programs, and project initiation. We're also joined by Garrett Ucalito, who was confirmed as Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Transportation in January 2023. As Commissioner, he oversees an agency tasked with the responsibility of providing safe and efficient intermodal transportation network that improves the quality of life for all. In this capacity, he administers a nearly $3 billion annual budget and works alongside over 3,500 colleagues at CTDOT, making it one of Connecticut's largest state agencies. We're also joined by Natasha Fatu, who is a transportation engineer with the Connecticut Department of Transportation. With more than 20 years of transportation engineering experience, she's mainly worked at the Department of Transportation, working in the Division of Traffic Engineering and the Office of State Traffic Administration. She's currently working in traffic engineering as a state safety engineer, planning and implementing statewide systemic and spot location safety projects that will improve Connecticut roadways for all users. So that's our panel. We're delighted to have them here to help share their stories about what they've been working on. Next, I would like to turn things over to Becky Crow with some welcome and introductory comments from FHWA, and then we'll get rolling with the rest of the presentations. So Becky, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Dan. And Dan, listen, you got to say it this way. You got to say it. You can do it. So I'm just excited to be here. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got an amazing panel. So I just want to say thank you so much for Massachusetts and Connecticut DOT for sharing their knowledge with us. We know when we're looking at fatalities in terms of ped bike, we continue to creep upwards. We know we're going in the wrong direction, and we really want to hear from these two leaders. And, what are you guys doing different? How are you, breaking down these barriers? So I'm just here to welcome you all. Thank you to VHB. Thank you to PBIC for helping to organize this. And I hope a lot of our focused approach to safety, ped, and bike states and MPOs are online. Welcome to you all and just all of our stakeholders out there. So I'm excited to get started. So Dan, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Please. Thanks, Becky. I'll be more enthusiastic the next time I say the title of the webinar, I promise. Let's go ahead and send things up to Massachusetts, where Jackie DeWolf will share some of the work that they've been doing in this area. Jackie, whenever you're ready, you can pull your slides up and we can get started.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Just a heads up, and for anyone else who's experiencing this storm in, I guess, the whole Northeast, if I do lose power internet, then Dan will take over my slides and I'll just keep talking via my phone. But it seems we're in a state where every other road is closed right now. And I hope everyone who's listening in is doing well. So here to talk from Massachusetts, unfortunately, Carrie LaValle, our Deputy Administrator and Chief Engineer, is not able to join today because she also has no power, no internet, and schools are closed. So I will be doing the whole presentation and channeling her exceptional leadership in this arena. So with this, as Becky said, you can do it too. I like to show this slide. Some of what I'll talk about today is some of what our original plan was, which doesn't always look exactly what the exact actual experience has been, and again differs from maybe what the official story is after the fact. So just want to have everyone keep this in mind, and as people have questions, happy to talk about the actual experience at any time to help you figure out how to do it too. So I want to touch on three things, kind of our multi-pronged approach to institutionalizing safety in projects. So going to talk about integrating safety for all into project development processes. 2, initiating standalone complete streets and safety projects. And 3, providing funding to municipalities to advance complete streets and safety locally. I'm going to really focus on 1 and 2, and then I'll just quickly touch on 3, but happy to answer questions. In terms of what I'm calling our North Star, our long-term aim, Massachusetts has a number of different plans that have come out at different times over the years. And one being our Strategic Highway Safety Plan. We just released our 2023, adopting a safe system approach and the goal of 0 roadway deaths and serious injuries. Lots of plans around resiliency that also really play into some of our complete streets and safety work, and mobility, providing all people safe, comfortable, and convenient mobility options. I would also encourage people, I'm going to really focus on project development for today, but I encourage people to look at our Strategic Highway Safety Plan if you want to learn more about what we're doing in other arenas around encouragement and education and enforcement. So diving in, safety for all in project development. So this is really the framework for if we're doing a project, regardless of what it is, pavement preservation, bridge, roadway, or we are constructing a municipal project that is getting state or federal aid, how are we integrating safety into our process? And one of the things we found in Massachusetts is that changes at every step of the process is really critical. Loosely, this is our project development process. A project's identified, it's initiated, it gets officially approved, then project goes through scoping, 25% design, 75% design, 100% design, and finally plans, specs, and estimates for it to go out to construction. And what we have found is that building in questions related to safety, data related to safety, and roadway users has been really critical, with especially this emphasis of pre-25 to make sure that we're adding in kind of checks and balances, questions, data to help make informed decisions at every step. One of those really critical steps has been the release of our controlling criteria engineering directive. So as a super short history, we had a policy that was formed in 2013 that stated all transportation projects will increase biking, transit, and walking. How was less clear. It was then followed by an engineering directive in 2014 that operationalized the policy through our highway division within our chief engineer's office. And I would note that without it, I'm not sure anything would have actually changed as a result of just the policy, but the engineering directive really solidified, what does that mean? And then we updated it in 2020 again, really just recognizing that, lessons learned. The 2014 one had some really good stuff, but also was imperfect. And we are also looking to update it again in 2020 from further lessons learned. So recognizing that it's a work in progress, and always looking to kind of update it is really critical. In 2014, we used to say this was a bike accommodation. And just say a 5-foot shoulder is a bike accommodation, and you could kind of check the box and move on. And we really want to move away from that. I always ask people, would you send your children, your neighbor, your grandparents, your parents, out biking? And so we're, really moving towards defining, being really thoughtful about what actually defines a bicycle accommodation, as well as a walking accommodation, as well as a transit accommodation, and really focusing on how to do that. And I'll talk about how we do that in just a moment. The other thing that we've done is really connect accommodations to speed, and making sure that that first you have a target speed where you say what is the speed you want people to be going on this roadway, and then how do you design to get it? And in some cases, you want to lower the speed. And what does that mean for what accommodations? And in some cases, you will have a higher speed road, but how do you make sure that you have protected intersections, separation of users, high visibility, so that you reduce exposure and you reduce and you prevent the likelihood of a crash. So I'm going to just talk through quickly what we actually consider our controlling criteria, which is really what drives what it means to integrate safety and complete streets for all in any project. So one is this pedestrian facility criteria, which is defining that you have to put sidewalks on both sides in certain contexts, what the minimum width is, as well as crosswalks. We also have criteria for biking, also saying that bike facilities are required anywhere where bicycles are legally allowed. Bicycle facilities should have separation, again, tying back to kind of speed and safety, whether it's high vehicle volume or more than one travel lane, or higher speed, then separation is required. And then there's different criteria around widths. And then one key thing here is roadways as classified as high potential for everyday biking, because there was a perception that, biking was only for urban areas. And or Boston in the case of Massachusetts. But we run an analysis and we rerun it every 2 years with different data to show that there's medium and high potential for biking, everyday biking in most of the state. And we use this as another criteria to kind of help guide where facilities are required for these projects. We also added in 2020 a transit provision related to both access to transit in terms of crosswalks and amenities, as well as amenities, shelters, and bus stops and benches and priority treatments, depending on the type of transit on the roadway. So we have all this criteria, and anyone can kind of dig into that more to see what the specific technical, specs are. But one thing I really want to stress is that as one key component is our design justification workbook, where we said that all projects submitted have to have a design justification. And within that, there's different tabs where you show what the existing facility is, what you're proposing, and why. One of the interesting things about all of this in terms of just like lessons learned is, again, this kind of changes at every step of the process is really key. So design justification process is only one step in the entire process. And it's really the point where at this point you're justifying what you've done. But again, as we've added in questions and criteria kind of into all of these steps in the process, looking to really make sure that once you get to the justification process, there's consensus about why you're doing something or why you can't do something or what the alternative is that you're proposing. One really interesting part about all of this is this does not compute, as an agency, as a state agency, it's not just Complete Streets and Safety, but it's everything where the pressure to deliver projects on time, on budget, within scope, having really, great consultant scope of services and setting expectations with the public. It doesn't really compute with, let's add requirements, let's add process, let's add scope, let's add sign-offs, let's add approvals, add committee meetings. And so one of the really critical parts of this process that we've been in, and this kind of updating of the process over the last few years, has really been looking for ways we can simplify the process, better set expectations early and often, and really make sure that it's a collaborative approach to the outcomes we want to see. And so a couple key things I wanted to share, again, was integrating Complete Streets and Safety early and often. Unfortunately, what used to happen back in 2014 when it was first released was you would only see what was justified at like 25% design, but already so much time and resources were put into a project. And it was really like, okay, how do we shift some of these discussions earlier into the process? 2 was really defining what constitutes a pedestrian, bicycle, and transit accommodation, saying it's not just a 5-foot shoulder, but really, based on the context, what is the type of facility that's needed, and being very specific about defining what that facility is. Simplifying the process. So I showed a screenshot of that design justification workbook. That was actually in an effort to move away from reports. So we used to get reports that could be 10 pages or 100 pages, or could cost a consultant, or a municipality $10,000 or $40,000. And so we really worked to kind of simplify the process. Again, helping projects stay kind of on time, on budget, and really simplify kind of documentation. The approval in the process, if you do not meet these requirements, it's has to be approved by the chief engineer, administrator, and secretary of transportation. This is really helps institutionalize it, ensure some checks and balances, and make sure that it doesn't just not happen, quite frankly. So once it gets to that point, most are approved, but there's a process in advance, collaboration, design justification kind of committee, comment resolution meetings that help get to the point where there's buy-in, and then ultimately approval process. And then again, an exception process for when accommodations cannot be made. But one thing I really want to stress here is it's not a matter of getting out of doing complete streets or safety. It's just really when there are limitations. And that's also when we see an incredible amount of creativity, which our assistant chief engineer often says, design exceptions create exceptional designs. So even though it's the process to, if you can't meet the criteria, it's also when, again, we see a lot of creativity in designs to be able to provide safe accommodations for everyone, or be more creative and thoughtful. If you can only have a sidewalk on one side, what does it mean for crossings? Or if you don't have room for separation of every mode, how do you have side paths? And just, coming up with different solutions that make our streets better for everyone. One of the kind of second thing I just wanted to touch on for today, so I talked about, the project development process and how critical it is that we have been able to add questions about safety for everyone at all these different steps of the process. But the other really critical component is, well, where do projects come from in the first place? And so Massachusetts has been able to make progress with our directives to make sure that if we're doing a bridge project or we're doing a pavement project, that we're integrating safety for all and complete streets. But if the project is only coming from a state of good repair, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing projects where sidewalks or bike facilities or transit facilities or safety improvements are needed most, and where there's kind of maybe the highest risk or the highest need. And so one of the most significant things that we have made an investment in the last really year and a half is we have created a whole new function called program management. And this stems back, again, from where do projects come from in the first place? And we define a program as a set of related activities with a particular long-term aim. Our capital plan is organized by over a dozen different programs, bicycle and pedestrian, safety, ITS, and we now have program managers responsible for each of those programs. Those program managers look to maximize the outcome within those different areas. And they do that through identifying and prioritizing projects, facilitating project scoping, and then actually programming projects to inform our capital budget. And this is just a picture of some of my colleagues on our team who are program managers for resiliency, shared use paths, roadway intersections, safety, ADA, and they're actually doing a site visit of a project that we just constructed. So if you look at the project development process, I think one of the really critical things, especially for anyone on the call who's working at a DOT or who is advocating for specific projects, is, again, we've looked at critically kind of where do projects come from, and adding in this function that really focuses on analysis, project identification, project initiation, facilitating project scoping, and at that point hands it off to a project manager that really takes it from 25% design to construction. What historically used to happen is there used to be plans kind of all the way to the left on the screen, and then project management on the right. And we identified, kind of this gap as we were looking really to make investments in complete streets and safety. In terms of how that works, government is set up as kind of a command control structure with the hierarchy of, who works for who and leadership. But we kind of creating a new way of working around creating internal working groups, external working groups, kind of cross-functional teams. So as each program manager is managing a program and identifying projects, they're working with municipalities, our district offices, they're working with our maintenance crews, they're working with our environmental section to be able to kind of identify where the needs are, taking an engagement approach, data-driven approach to identifying those projects. One thing that I just want to kind of stress in this is, at times it can feel very larger than life to say like, okay, we're going to do these projects because we want to, have 0 fatalities or serious injuries, or we want to make sure that everyone has the option to walk and bike for short trips. And so much in transportation, we're focused just on inputs, like how many projects were completed or how much funding was spent, how much guidance was released or websites created. And then, we'd hope that that would get us to the outcomes we desire. What the program management team is really focused on, as well as just the agency as a whole, is looking at how can we focus on outputs we control in support of the outcomes we desire. So we're working towards, with those projects that we're identifying, how can we increase the percentage of people who have access to the high comfort pedestrian network for everyday short trips? How can we have high visibility crosswalks at every bus stop? How can we have, make sure our trails, shared use paths are in good condition, curb ramps are accessible, bus transit accommodations, as well as reduction in things like operating speeds exceeding target speeds statewide. And that all helps lead to the outcomes, that North Star, those state goals that I mentioned in the beginning, around 0 pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries, or policy statements like let's triple walking, biking, and transit trips, more kids walking and biking to school. And we recognize that there's a lot of things that tie into those outcomes, especially with the safe system approach. It's safe vehicles, it's safe roads, it's safe speeds, it's post-crash care, it's safe roadway users. And again, if you look at some of our statewide plans, you can see how we're doing different things to touch on those. But within kind of highway, within roadway work and safety and infrastructure and project development, looking at this kind of middle section to say, okay, how can we create the infrastructure that enables people to move using any mode, and work on increasing safety and comfort. One of the really key things, shift that we have made is around mobility in Massachusetts, is focusing on this everyday short trips, which you've heard me mention a couple times through these slides. And what I mean by that is that more than 50% of all trips are less than 3 miles. And 3 miles just is equivalent to a 16-minute bike ride. And additionally, the majority of trips are non-commute. And historically, transportation is very, very focused on commute trips and models that focus on kind of that 9 to 5. And so we've are shifting to really think about the majority of trips and how do we and thinking differently about kind of the context of the roadway to make sure that people can have the option to get around, and it's more than just work trips in terms of people and destinations, and really linking to land use for decision making. So a couple quick examples around that program development. We have a new vulnerable road user bus stop project where we have identified that a significant amount of pedestrian crashes happen near bus stops. Whether those people are actually using transit or not, we don't know, but it's a theme. And so we are actively looking at, we've identified bus stops that do not have great accommodations. Here's a great example of one where it's just a post on a sign on a major road. And so we are actively now initiating projects on roadways all across Massachusetts to increase safety at bus stops and for all people who are moving in those areas. Another example of what we're doing for program development is we have a new study where we are leveraging our LiDAR for paving to actually have a updated sidewalk inventory, and we'll be able to extrapolate condition data from that and be able to, again, identify where the highest need is and not just wait for another project to happen and then add a sidewalk, but actually maybe initiate a sidewalk project for sidewalk's sake. I love this example because I think this is just illustrative of how on the left you would see this bridge, and our inventory might show that there's a sidewalk, but there is nothing usable about that or comfortable about that sidewalk, with it being maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet with a pole in the middle. Fortunately, we have, this is now the new approach on the right that fully provides support. You used to see people, we have a video actually of, on the left, a woman with strollers. Everyone's running across the street there because there's no way to get on the sidewalk, and people would be crossing the bridge and then going underneath what is actually train tracks there on the left. Very unsafe. So working to identify these locations and fix them across the state. Just some project examples for inspiration, or I've talked a lot, there's been lots of words, but when we talk about advancing mobility and safety for all, it looks different everywhere. It could be on the left, that's a new bridge for a shared use path on Cape Cod, or in the middle, a new roundabout on Route 140 in Princeton, Mass. This is another example from Worcester and Kelly Square. We just fully rebuilt a new intersection, which was one time the most dangerous intersection, one of the worst in Massachusetts. Or on the right, this is Charles River Dam Road, which used to just be many lanes for cars, and we have taken steps to using quick build treatments with flex posts and with paint to try out different accommodations, adding in bicycle facilities, adding in transit accommodations, and making improvements. Our project types range from everything from just simply lane markings and changing lane markings for safety, adding in crosswalks, up to changing curbs, expanding a new infrastructure, all the way to, large, very expensive, but significant trail connections, where this is a new bike ped bridge over Route 2. So they take many different shapes and sizes, but we're really looking at how we can use everything kind of from quick build all the way to kind of the 10-year capital projects to make improvements, and making sure that as much as we can do things quicker and cheaper as needed. The last part about this kind of three-pronged approach, which I won't go into detail, but I just want to acknowledge that is really significant for Massachusetts, which is supporting local projects. The graphic on the right shows that actually the vast majority of roadways in Massachusetts are under municipal control. So cities and towns own roughly 81% of roadways. When I talked about the first part of our engineering directive, that applies to local roads that are going through the state and federal aid process in Massachusetts. It also applies to that second bullet, which is identifying standalone projects, because as we identify needs, some of those are on municipal roadways, and we're actively knocking on doors saying, let's initiate projects where it's needed most. And then the third part, though, is providing funding to communities and municipalities, and so that they can work on projects locally. And those images are just a couple examples where we've made a shift in the last couple of years to fund both reconstruction and expansion of kind of permanent infrastructure, as well as kind of quick build and supporting communities to rapidly do things with flex posts and cones and paint within months, to also see changes on our street quicker. So with that, I'll finish and look forward to the discussion and answering questions, but want to end again with this image that I just shared a lot of information. I would say, the original plan maybe looked a little like this official story that I just told, but if you'd asked us in 2014 or 2020 if we'd be where we are today, we wouldn't have known that. And the actual experience has definitely been ups and downs, but lots of lessons learned. Looking forward to sharing on this webinar around engagement and collaboration and overcoming those to be able to realize changes in our project development process here in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. A nice overview of what you all did and some in-depth examples there too. We are going to come back and have a bit more of an in-depth discussion period in a little while, but next we're going to hear a similar story from your neighbors in Connecticut, at Connecticut DOT. So Garrett Iccolito and Natasha Fatu, you're up next, and please go ahead and share your slides whenever you're ready, and we'll continue on with the program.
Thank you. Go. That should be visible. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're out on the West Coast. Garrett Iccolito. I'm the commissioner here at Connecticut Department of Transportation. I took over in January, and excited to talk to you today about how we here at ConnDOT are looking to institutionalize safety in our everyday work. So, recapping what the goals are of this presentation, right? To connect our transportation professionals and to inspire other practices and procedures and policies and guidance. So one thing that we historically have done here at ConnDOT, and I think many other state DOTs and local DOTs, and something that I've always been driven by, is having a data-driven approach. It allows us to make decisions that we see as most impactful and able to defend those when we have to go before the legislature, before other elected officials, to talk to them about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So on the left-hand side there, you see a listing of a lot of the types of data that is being collected and analyzed every single day at ConnDOT and at many other locations across the country. We use this to try and identify systemic safety issues, as you can see there on the right-hand side. And we also identify crash types, the roadway facility types where crashes are going to occur, what the contributing crash factors are, what characteristics are associated with those crashes, and what human factors or behaviors are associated with those. And I think when we talk to people not in the transportation profession, I think a lot of them are surprised by the various types of data that is being collected and analyzed every single day to allow us to do our jobs. It's not just crash data. It is volumes, it's geometry, it's data from the vehicles, it's cell phone data that we see from some private companies. It's law enforcement. So the quality of the data that's being collected, doing that QA/QC on the data is really critical. And it's something I talk quite a bit about, is if we're not gathering enough data, we're not able to really address the root cause of what's happening on our roadways to cause some of the serious injuries and crashes that are occurring. So for us, motivation, why we have begun to take steps to further institutionalize safety here at ConnDOT is, as we have seen the trends move in the wrong direction, both in our state and nationally, we identified that what we had been doing was no longer working. For many years, we saw continual progression towards fewer serious injuries and fatalities. That arc began to turn the opposite direction, and it's something that we as an agency wanted to begin to address. We have, as previously mentioned, collected all this data. We're analyzing it. So we needed to look at different ways we could address what's happening on our roadways, not just focusing on fatals, but also focusing on the serious injuries that are continuing to occur, because every single crash, whether it's a serious injury or not, and every single fatality, there's a significant impact on the family of those individuals. There's a significant impact to the economy. And we need to think about all of those and use that data to make the case for why we need continued investment in improving safety on our roadways. So one thing we did here at Connecticut DOT is we took the past few years, we've taken a very broad approach to try to institutionalize safety. So the one thing we have done is partner really closely with our Connecticut General Assembly, which is our state legislature. So we have, as our chair of our transportation committee, a champion for safety in Representative Roland Lamar. He partnered with me to craft legislation and pass legislation that became law, creating what's called a Vision Zero Council, a statewide Vision Zero Council. And that's a multidisciplinary group. And it has the traditional partners you would think of. So it has the state police on there. It has our traffic safety resource prosecutor, but it also has our Connecticut Department of Public Health. It has our Aging and Disability Services Department. It has our Office of Early Childhood, it has our State Department of Education, and then it has our Department of Motor Vehicles as well. So that's a pretty broad group, and we have been meeting quarterly to try and develop recommendations to improve safety on our roadways and aim for Vision Zero. But we also created various subcommittees made up of individuals both within state government, within municipal government, outside stakeholders, private citizens who are passionate about these issues. And those subcommittees meet when in the months that our council is not meeting, and they end up bringing, it's a bottoms up approach to give us at the council recommendations on how to improve safety at the statewide level. Several of those items ended up becoming state law. And so we're really excited that this is the first year of those new laws having taken effect in July. So we're excited to see them progress. Things such as automated traffic enforcement in school zones, as well as intersections that are prone to crashes. We have our strategic highway safety plan that Natasha leads for us. As part of that, we've conducted the vulnerable road user assessment. We also have, similarly to the Vision Zero Council, it's made up of multidisciplinary partners. And we have commissioners of those agencies participating at the table with us to talk about how to improve safety and to set the direction for our agency of where to focus our investments in the future. And that really allows us to identify those risk factors and identify those priorities. Through our State Highway Safety Office, which partners with NHTSA and administers our NHTSA funds, we have our Highway Safety Plan, which again partners really closely with what Natasha does to ensure that there's coordination in what's done there. Over the past 3 years, we, beginning in 2020, we've really tried to invest heavily and try to do some speed management. As we saw speeds increasing, as we saw fatalities increasing, we began to invest heavily in state-funded, tools to help local governments. Similar to what Massachusetts talked about, we have funded a whole bunch of road safety audits at the local level to allow municipalities to approach us if they have a specific concern in a problem area. They approach us, they apply to our policy and planning bureau and say, here's the problem, here's what we're seeing, we'd like your help. So we have a consultant on board, we go out and do the walk, we do a road safety audit and come back with recommendations. And many of those recommendations are being implemented and being funded through state and federal process. Similarly, we have a community connectivity grant program that has been wildly successful. We've awarded over, I forget the exact amount, Natasha. It's like over 100 grants and how many millions of dollars?
$61 million.
Yeah. So may not seem that large compared to other states, but we are a small state. So, that goes a long way in Connecticut. And it's only been a few years, a few rounds worth of funding. And that is direct investments in local projects to improve safety for all users. This past year, in 2023, we participated in Transportation for America, Smart Growth America's Complete Streets Leadership Academy. And that was another effort to try and partner with local governments and work really closely to identify how can we do some quick build projects to improve safety, because we know the state process for getting permits to do work on state roadways can be kind of, cumbersome. So how can we partner together to identify what the hurdles are and really expedite those types of quick build projects? We're working on updating our highway design manual and as well as our signal design manual. Natasha is going to go into depth on our controlling design criteria. And then one thing we have started to do in the past couple of years is focus on reorganizing our agency. We launched a new position here to have to resurrect our Safe Routes to School coordinator position and start a new Safe Routes to School program, which we did not have funding for to do in the past. We also just launched a new active transportation unit, which was previously folded into other parts of our Bureau of Policy and Planning, and now it's going to stand out as its own unit with its own dedicated staff. So we're excited about some other efforts there. Natasha has broken off in traffic engineering, standing out a team just focused on safety as well, because as more and more work comes through traffic engineering, we know and recognize the fact that safety needs to be our priority there. And so the last thing I want to touch on before we turn it over to Natasha is, a couple things focus on, how we got to where we are today. So all of those other pieces of what we've been doing in the background, for many of our states, we have the safety performance target setting, both in our highway safety plan and our strategic highway safety plan. And so you see on the screen, there are focus areas. One thing that I've said to staff internally, I'm always uncomfortable calling these our targets. The fact that we're setting targets as an industry, we're setting a target for a specific number of injuries or fatalities on a roadway. Now, I understand that that's, required of us through the federal process. I like to call them more performance measures. What we expect a performance of our system to be is to see that many serious injuries and fatalities. Is less so, in my mind, a target, because my target is 0. Right, that's where I want to be every single year, and that's what we need to strive for. But we put in place those performance measures so we can track to see where we're going, and so it's really important for us to continuously track that and update it. And every month, we continuously track those measures. And when I took over in January, one thing I told my team my first day in the job was, my 3 priorities as commissioner are really going to be safety, accessibility, and sustainability. And that's going to root everything I do and the lens through which I view everything that comes across my desk and every meeting I participate in. And so that, I believe, really provided the impetus for what Natasha, what our chief engineer, Scott Hill, and our engineering administrator, Mark Carlino, they went back and looked at, after hearing from me what my priorities were, they came up with, our, complete streets controlling design criteria, which is, something that we want to talk quite a bit about. And it, as my former colleague, Sean Wilson from Louisiana Department of Transportation would say, R&D is rip off and duplicate. We look up to Massachusetts. They're like our big sibling right across the border. And so really, Natasha can talk a bit about, how we approached our complete streets controlling design criteria, because we did look up to Massachusetts quite a bit on the successes that they've had. So Natasha, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, we did look up to Massachusetts in more ways than one. Not only are they north of us, but we did take took some of their lessons, spoke with them, and came up with some what our design criteria is. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into Connecticut's Complete Streets Directive. Similar to Massachusetts, we did actually have a complete streets policy in 2014. But as you saw the numbers earlier in the presentation, our numbers of fatal and serious injury crashes were trending in the wrong direction. So we recognized we needed to do more. And the pedestrian numbers specifically, or vulnerable road users, those types of crashes were happening even more than in the previous years. The rate at which those were happening was a little scary. So we needed to really look at all our vulnerable road users. So through the Vision Zero Council, we were able to specifically our engineering subcommittee, recognizing the need to kind of have a more robust design criteria, put forth legislation to help help the department or help others to recognize that we were serious about a better design criteria. That legislation did pass this past summer in July. And so we worked with we have a complete streets committee here at the department, but really our chief engineer and engineering administrator took the lead. They took the reins on what this design criteria would look like, and came up with a more robust complete streets policy that provided actual design criteria. So there is a directive that came out from our chief engineer's office. And as Garrett mentioned earlier, we did work with a different number of groups. We worked with our policy and planning group. We reached out to our bike ped advocates and others in the municipal officials to come up with criteria for our complete streets. So similar to Massachusetts, we have 3 new controlling design criteria on all ConnDOT projects. For PED facilities, we are requiring sidewalks on both sides of the road, a minimum width of 5 feet. Marked crosswalks shall be provided at every leg of a signalized intersection where sidewalks are present and or proposed. Previously, our designs for a signalized intersection would be to try to get a crosswalk across the street. And if we couldn't achieve it in both directions, we would at a minimum just put one with the countdown PEDs only on the side that had that crosswalk. Now we will be moving to make sure that every leg of the intersection has a crosswalk. And now we are also, illumination shall be provided for marked crosswalks on all state roads. So we are looking to every crosswalk, whether it's at a signalized intersection or a mid-block crosswalk, looking to illuminate it. Here in Connecticut, we have a program or a number of projects where we are installing rectangular rapid flashing beacons on state and local roads. We've partnered with our municipalities to identify locations where they would like to have the rectangular rapid flashing beacon installed. And we have just recently changed our design so that the rectangular rapid flashing beacon will also have the lighting in it to provide lighting for the pedestrians so that it's more forward facing and the pedestrian can be visible by a vehicle, especially at night. For those that are not getting the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, through our VIP maintenance program, when they're repaving, we're identifying marked crosswalks and working with our illumination group here at ConnDOT to have lighting installed, whether it's a standalone post or can be attached to an existing utility pole. So those are some of the things on the engineering side that we're already kind of working on here in addition to the complete streets controlling design criteria. So the next one we looked at was the bicycle facility selection matrix. And that's very similar to Massachusetts here, where we are identifying the different types of bicycle facilities and then the minimum requirements that would be what we're looking for. And we're trying to identify those facilities based on what may be existing. If there's an existing bike lane and we're having a project come through, we're going to continue that bicycle lane, and we're going to make sure that whatever facility type is appropriate for the area that the project is in. We also have a transit provisions where our Office of Transit and Ride Sharing and Rails, we are going to be having them provide input for all of our projects. So do we need bus shelters? Do we need rail crossings because we have an at-grade crossing? previously, we would send this information out to the different departments, but may not always get a response. Now we're going to be requiring them to provide a response for all of the projects. We're going to be putting a shelter or bench at all transit stops with high levels of boarding. And then marked crosswalks within 400 feet of existing or proposed transit stops. We'll be working with the transit group on those marked crosswalks, the communities, to identify where these crosswalks should be. So it won't be something that the department's just making that decision. These really are ideas or concepts that we are going to be working with the communities to make sure we're placing them in the appropriate locations. Illumination to be provided at all transit stops, and ensuring that there's ADA compliance at all of them. So that's making sure that there's a bus landing pad, or making sure that the bus can get can meet the person at the stops. Next slide, please. So what does that look like for Connecticut? How do we apply that? So we are going to be putting all of our projects that are administered by ConnDOT, whether they receive federal or state funding, this controlling design criteria will apply. We are encouraging municipalities as well to adopt either our complete streets criteria or come up with their own. And we have been going out to do a number of presentations to the communities to let them know what our design criteria is and how it could be applied to their projects. We do have a group here in our Office of the State Traffic Administration that also looks at larger developments that are coming to Connecticut. So that might be, and that requires approval from us, but the work being done is done by the developer. We're also having that group look at some of the controlling design criteria to see if there is components of the criteria that could be applied to the development and how they're, depending on what kind of improvements they're making for their development. We do have the design exception similar to Massachusetts, where it may only be granted by the chief engineer. So similar to Mass, we have come up with justification worksheets. Every project will be required to fill out the justification worksheet. And if there are any design exceptions or a situation where it may not be feasible, only the chief engineer can sign off on that particular waiver. And it may not be all elements of the design criteria, maybe just one isn't met, but it still is going to require that chief engineer to sign off on that. Next slide, please. So what are some of the challenges? We are a little bit new to this. Our complete streets policy came out just this year. Our directive came out shortly thereafter. And so we're still a little bit new, but so far we have found that our project screening requires robust enterprise level data. Commissioner Garrett spoke about data earlier in the presentation. That is very key to us. We are constantly gathering more data, and not just on crashes like he mentioned. It's important to know where our lighting is, where the transit stops are. So this project screening is going to require that we maintain the quality of data that we're collecting and gathering. Another big one is traffic safety culture. It's really a shift in mindset that this isn't about the vehicles. For many years, engineers have been designing for 85th percentile speeds for a motorist. Now it's recognizing that everyone should be able to get to their destination, whether they walk or use transit or bicycle. So it's really that shift in mindset. We are slowly, in engineering, we've kind of gone right for it. We're working now on instead of maybe using 85th speed, focusing on a target speed. What's the goal? What should the speed of this roadway be? As I mentioned, engineers for years have been focusing on 85th. So we go through and we clear the whole roadway, and then we're surprised when people are driving much higher than this posted speed limit. Now we're going to intentionally be looking at the roadway, look at the users, look at the geometry. What should this roadway be set at? And let's design for that. So it's really a shift in traffic safety culture. Then training, it's going to take some training. A lot of this is new for our engineers, focusing more on the speed of the road, what the speed of the roadway should be versus just going in and clearing out the congestion. So it's going to take some training to help us identify, what facility should be here, what is appropriate for the project. And so we're going to be doing some training over the next few months and even into the next year. Another challenge is project scoping and identifying opportunities. Jacqueline, I like your statement that design exceptions can lead to exceptional designs. That may be relevant here. We are finding that sometimes, we had an intention for a project, but now with the design criteria if put forth, it may lead to a little bit of scope creep. So we're going to identify opportunities of what is justifiable for making this more user-friendly, the roadway more user-friendly? What does our design look like? So it's identifying, and prioritizing what improvements we're going to be making for our projects. NEPA and environmental impacts is always a challenge. Making sure we're in New England, there's a lot of history here. So making sure we fall within the requirements and take account for the environmental impacts. And that goes along with right-of-way too. We have very limited right-of-way in certain areas. So it's going to be coming up with some identifying opportunities for a different design. Maybe what we thought we were going to be doing at a particular project location is going to change slightly, but it's going to be beneficial for all. And so that also talks to you about evolving standards. We're constantly changing things, updating our standards. Apparently, I'm hearing that MUTCD is going to be coming out by the end of the year. So we'll be taking all of those factors and different guidance documents and resources to ensure that we stay up to keeping our design criteria up to date and making sure we design a roadway for all users. Next slide. And lessons learned, we're not quite there, Massachusetts and other states. We are, like I mentioned, we the directive came out this year. We are starting to apply it to our projects now. That was part of the directive. So any projects that are have yet to receive their design approval do need to follow this criteria and fill out the justification worksheet. So we do have some projects that maybe we need to tweak the design a little bit to ensure that we follow the directive. So we're still learning here in Connecticut, and it's to be determined, how we may move forward with some of the issues or concerns that may arise. And we may be looking to you, Massachusetts. And with that, that concludes Connecticut's presentation, but we're happy to answer some questions.
And Natasha, I think you're going to have some heavy reading tomorrow, potentially on the MUTCD, not to scoop anyone.
And that's all
I'm excited.
Thank you for that. We'll shift to discussion mode because we got a lot of great questions, and I think there's a lot of information that you all queued up that is just ripe for some deeper discussion around how you did it, what did you encounter, the nuts and bolts of maybe what it might take, what the transferability of this might be to other agencies. So let's go there now. The first question I wanted to ask you, in going through all of this work, and you hinted at some of this, you're looking internally at what can we change, what could be different, what's keeping us from meeting our goals. And my impression is that you probably encountered a group or an agency or an office or maybe an external partner that was maybe a bit more reluctant to make some big changes or to do this work. I'm not asking you to say who that was, but what was that process like of identifying maybe a little bit of pushback and helping to bring along others in your departments or outside of your departments that might have been a bit more resistant to some of these changes? Jackie, you could go first, or Garrett, Natasha. Sorry, I didn't.
I'll let Jackie.
Sure. I think one of the things, so again, I'm sorry Carrie couldn't be here with us, but one of the things we were talking about in prep was this kind of initial shock that there was a lot of concern, when anything new gets started. And it's not just Complete Streets and Safety, it's kind of in any process. I think it was the shock even internally from our own colleagues about that certain projects were already far along and there was no more scope, time, or money to change the project. And so, that kind of transition zone, we did, like Connecticut, put in things around, like if a project was at a certain stage, it would be kind of like grandfathered in. But I will say, after it's been instituted now for many years, now that these new policies are on the books on day one, it is so much easier. It is so much easier, so it was kind of overcoming that initial shock that really kind of underpinned, like I said, that does not compute, like for a municipality or for a project manager or for leadership, like, oh gosh, how are we going to spend our money on time, on budget? How are we going to get these projects delivered? Kind of these performance metrics in the world of transportation. And now we're saying, like, okay, we're adding process, we're adding requirements. But again, now that we can capture that early, and we can identify that early in the process, we can set that expectation and really a feeling of less resistance.
That's great. Thank you, Jackie.
So I can start and then I can turn over to Natasha. So I think there's two groups really that raise some concerns to me, and I imagine many others maybe within the department didn't raise them up to me, right? They might have gone to Natasha to complain. But one is every state DOT is structured differently, but our Bureau of Highway Operations and Maintenance, their job is to maintain the infrastructure. And they are significantly understaffed to begin with. And so, they acknowledged some concerns about putting new infrastructure out there that they're going to have to maintain when they struggle to get the job done today. Especially, given our climate up here. So that was one group, and there's been really good discussions back and forth between our chief engineer and our bureau chief of highway operations and maintenance and our maintenance administrator, talking about what will that look like, what are the expectations for maintenance. I think the other group, surprisingly, they're not going to say so publicly necessarily, is there are some municipalities that have raised concerns to me that they don't want sidewalks. They don't want bike infrastructure. And that was part of the impetus for this is, oftentimes we were being criticized for lack of inclusion of some of this infrastructure on some of our projects, when in reality, a mayor or first selectman was coming to me saying, I don't want a sidewalk in this project. And so this is our opportunity to be like, no, we're going to include that. It's the right thing to do to improve safety. Natasha, I don't know if you want to talk about internally.
Yeah, I would echo Jackie's sentiment from the engineer. It was shock. They knew it was coming, but they didn't know what to expect. And it's really on those projects that are kind of halfway through or like already in design. And now they have to shift gears and think a little bit differently. And that sometimes can be tough. But when we show the data, and I think that's very powerful, and say, a tweak in your design here, and it's not just a tweak, I'm using that facetiously, but a minor change in your design can provide so much benefit. And so it's really the projects that are kind of underway. Moving forward, we already have that in our heads that we're going to be looking at the area and identifying where we can, the design criteria, where we're going to be adding the sidewalks, the illumination. So it's a little bit easier and we can account for it. But yes, it turns into internally, it's the scope. Their thought is, oh, this is scope creep. But really it's not. It's just a change in the design so everyone can use that roadway.
Yeah, definitely. You hinted at something there in your responses that I wanted to get to next. And that is, after making some of these fairly significant changes, you probably, or it seems like you encountered opportunities to to have to make further investment in, say, you mentioned data, for example, data collection and data improvement as a big thing you wanted to do. And Jackie, you mentioned your project management teams that you invested in to kind of help manage and bring along this work. Could you speak about any other sort of bigger investments that you realized you had to make as a sort of an outgrowth maybe of some of these changes? And one that came up in a question from the chat is how did you begin to train up all of your staff on these changes? You know, what do they mean for your day-to-day? I imagine that there was a bit of a period there where outreach and educating within the department was a big focus.
Yep, I can start. So we haven't gotten to the point where we're necessarily looking at investing in the project, or, you know, that is a proportion, but I would agree with you, Dan, the investment is really in training. So we're going to be looking to get more training, you know, through whether it's NHI or Federal Highway Resource Center, but it's really, the investment is going to be for us, the training. How do we you know, what kind of design criteria we're looking at in our projects. I mean, that's already been set, but how do we get people to incorporate that here on some of our designs where we have limited right of way or environmental impact? So it's thinking of a unique design perhaps. And so it's going to be a lot of training on our end.
And I can add to Natasha's point too. So and resources. So understanding that Natasha's brought up the scope creep, right? You know, we may have budgeted a project for a certain amount of funding to do the project. One thing we did in advance of this about a year ago is this recently adopted budget by the legislature. We included a line item for complete streets investments on state roadways, kind of to, you know, preemptively begin to have a pot of funds we can use to make these safety improvements on state roadways that may not have been incorporated in previously into the project scope.
See, you had quite a few comments. Oh, I'm sorry, Jackie, I missed you there. What would you like to add?
Oh, no, it's okay. I was going to say all of the above, but I would say this is definitely where it's been like kind of an iterative process of, you know, proactively doing trainings, but using those trainings and conversations as like a feedback mechanism. So actually, when we made those updates in 2020, we didn't actually have an official plan to make those updates. We were doing like a roadshow and talking to people in the districts and municipalities and regions for other things related to mobility and sustainability. And yet the directive and the policy kept coming up, actually not always in a positive way. And so we were like, wait a second, there's something else here. So as we were doing all these other proactive conversations, the actual story is that we said, oh, wait, I think we need to like look back here and update it. And most people would say, we don't need to update it. We already have it. It's good. We need to do all these other things. But it was where the action was happening. And that's what led to our 2020 update. And then out of that, even, you know, our biggest investment is now standing up a whole new function and a whole new team, program management, to identify projects in the first place, to make sure that we're actually, you know, going where it's most needed. You know, it just continues to be an iterative process. So I think kind of accepting that when something goes out, there are going to be lessons learned immediately and unintended consequences, and kind of having that ongoing dialogue has been really important. And the other thing I would just add from an engagement is when that policy first came out, I actually was external to MassDOT. I was actually leading a community-based nonprofit advocacy group, and we were brought in to kind of talk about the development of that engineering directive. It's funny now that I kind of present on it and take more ownership as a MassDOT employee for the past 7 years. But again, we have continued to involve different external groups in our, you know, internal processes to make sure that we're hearing from more voices throughout the process as well.
Well, that's great. And that's where I wanted to take the next question, is thinking about, we did get quite a few questions and comments around public engagement, public input and participation in the process in general. And I guess there's two questions I wanted to ask. One is, you know, sort of more specifically about what you were speaking to, Jackie, is what was the role of a community level organization or an advocacy organization in engaging with some of the changes that were made as part of these sort of looking internally and updating your processes and policies. And then kind of bigger picture, is there anything new now now we have this new directive, new process, way of doing things that changes the way that public engagement, public input is used in that process? Are there more opportunities, say, or are there more direct opportunities for people to engage in some of this decision making? And I'll keep it with you, Jackie, because you've sort of gone full through the process here, and then maybe we can hear from Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, I would, all of the above. This is kind of one of the hardest things, right? I would say we shifted from what used to be kind of either non-existent public engagement. I remember we used to find out about a project, it was at 90% design, and there was a public hearing. And really all it was like a construction public hearing, like, hey, this is what's happening, this is when we're doing it, this is what to expect, these are going to be the closures, or why you see construction crews. And so there's been a tremendous shift in making sure that those, public engagement happens early and often. We also are updating our project development and design guides and SOPs, our standard operating procedures, to make sure that community input, is part of that process, or identifying, local plans that support, a project, or, how a project is shaped. So it's evolving. We're creating, different forums. We have advisory boards, or we have committee meetings where we're, either bringing in different entities to hear from them, or we took a new approach with some of our bike and pedestrian work to kind of go meet people where they are, and be out on the street, and go to different forums, and go to other groups' events, to get their input. So I could probably talk about this for like a whole other hour. But I would just underscore that it has served us well to have those conversations, because even if we can't address, I've done it. I've been leading some projects where we have groups of people going to go listen to people across the state. And, even if we can't address everyone's concern in that moment, hearing where everyone's coming at has only made our products and our work, even better. And then that helps inform, future communications. So, but still, again, we're on a learning journey too, as needs are ever evolving.
Thank you.
I would say Connecticut, similarly, like, it's an ever evolving journey as well. We use a lot of our new, subset units to really handle a lot of the day-to-day connections with the public. So our Safe Routes to School coordinator, really developing those tight partnerships with schools. We created a new ADA unit in our agency, who is constantly working with municipal officials, with public works departments, with advocacy community focused on ADA improvements. It's nonstop communication there. And then our group that administers our community connectivity grant program, as well. And then, through our partnerships with our local governments, we don't have county government in Connecticut. We have 169 towns and cities. So, we partner with all of them individually. We provide them with the funding to do the work, but we also provide them with tools. So speed feedback indicators, over 400 have been distributed to local governments to try and do some speed management on their roadways, because that's what we continuously heard from a lot of them. They don't have law enforcement in many cases. They rely on a resident state trooper who is based out of their community. So a lot of rural improvements necessary to reduce speeds, and those feedback indicators can really help there. So, but then we also created a new public involvement unit that's working with engineering. So Natasha's group, or our highway design group, or any other group that's doing projects in a community is going to have an in-house team that's sole job is to be focused on public involvement, establish those public engagement meetings, and really partner with those communities. Natasha, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
No, the only thing I'd add is that we have been doing more outreach, especially with this directive coming out, with meeting with our ped bike advisory groups. We have a Connecticut ped and Bike Advisory Board here in that meets regularly. So we've been going out and doing presentations for them, and we've been finding that going out and taking the initiative to go out and present to them has been very beneficial for us in that they appreciate us coming out and sharing what we're doing, and then they feel comfortable enough to provide us with relevant feedback, and we take that and we'll make adjustments based on that. So we've been doing a lot of presentations around the state.
Great, thank you. I wanted to shift to a topic that's important to a lot of folks in the webinar based on the comments we're seeing, is that's speed management. And Garrett, you just mentioned some of the speed feedback work, and there was a question about some of the other speed management strategies that Connecticut DOT is using. I think you mentioned a few here and there. I wondered if you all might help recap some of those for us. And then Jackie, I'll turn to you too, because I'm sure that focusing on traffic speed is a big part of Massachusetts work as well.
Yeah, so investing heavily in the speed feedback indicators, like I mentioned, distributing those to any local government that needs them, and then they're movable so they can address pain points throughout the community. But we also a few years ago focused on revisiting the 85th percentile rule, right? Moving away from that, and then we started. Previously, we did not have any raised crosswalks anywhere on a state roadway. So working Natasha's group and data-driven approach on that, and how do we we monitored speeds before and then after the raised crosswalks were installed, both in the lead up to it, to the actual crosswalk, and as you go past it. And so using that data, we've been able to show to some folks who may question like the maintenance issues for it, look at the speed benefits of this, right? And so that's allowed us to work to identify other places. There was an extensive road diet study that was conducted by our engineers, identifying roadways across the state that could, definitely deserve a road diet. So we're looking at that for potential to deploy as well and begin to address them as funding becomes available. And then lastly, automated traffic enforcement, working through the Vision Zero Council, and then through our legislature, we got legislative approval to deploy that. Our guidelines is only for municipalities, and they can do it on state roadways though. Our guidance is going to be issued on January 1st for them to apply to us for approval. And it's going to be very, equity is going to be centered in it entirely. And it's going to be, because that's a lot of the concerns that were raised, but it's going to be a community-based, equity data-driven approach. And it's going to be pretty interesting to see how it plays out.
Thank you for that.
So speed management is a huge topic. Like Garrett's saying, we in Massachusetts had kind of adopted a new approach a couple of years ago, but similar to the story of our evolving project development process, we have an evolving kind of learning as we go around speed management. So we adopted a new approach to speed management that's on the mass.gov/safe speeds website, really promoting kind of roadway toolkit and other elements to help realize safer speeds, and then implementing them in our own projects. We right now are further looking, after we adopt this new approach and started implementing it, now looking to actually institutionalize it through update to our project development and design guide that we're going to be releasing in the new year, which similar to the complete streets controlling criteria, we are also going to be having a very specific approach to defining what is your target speed on this roadway, what is the justification, how are you going to achieve it, if you can't, why or why not, how are you going to mitigate it, and then especially for safety for all, again, really making sure that it's just a given that based on the speed, you need certain types of facilities, and making sure then you accommodate. And if you can't realize that full separation, then you need to lower speeds, significantly, or vice versa. If you have higher speeds, where do you need that separation and high visibility? So it's really just, further baked in. We're also looking to all the changes that are going to be coming from Federal Highway and elsewhere that is also going to shape some of our speed management work moving forward. And I think one of the, the three kind of significant changes coming in Massachusetts are, one is kind of removing the reliance on the existing speed limit when it comes to making some of these decisions. So not saying this is what the posted speed limit is, we're going to design for 5 miles per hour above it, and that dictates then what facilities you can put on the roadway. And instead saying, not relying on maybe a speed regulation that was set in like 1972, that's still out there today, and actively saying, based on the current context and the land use, and the idea that there's, everyone wants to be able to use this road if they were safe and comfortable. How do we make it safe and comfortable? And I know there's been a lot of questions coming in about pedestrian counts and how do you know, again, removing that kind of reliance on knowing exactly how many people walk and bike there today, and not even worrying about who may or may not walk or bike there in the future, just making sure that as a state DOT, we are creating the option and we're enabling it to be possible for people to safely and comfortably travel, knowing that there's people of all ages, all abilities, everywhere, and even in any of our own individual lifetimes, we need to be able to move in different ways.
Sure. And that, I wanted to take a moment just to ask you a follow-up question, Jackie, because you've typed some really helpful responses about your potential for daily biking and walking as sort of measures you might be using, or if you could explain this a little bit more, I think it'd be beneficial, because I'm not sure everyone is as familiar with doing that sort of more proactive, forward looking at the potential for biking and walking.
Yes. So we, we were kind of stuck in this cycle of, well, how many people are biking and walking there today? Or I don't see anyone walking and biking, or waiting for the, transit, or there wasn't even transit marked on the plans. You'd have all these group of engineers looking at these plans, designing a roadway, and it wouldn't even be marked if there was a transit station or there was a bus stop. So, we, like everyone else, are kind of in this data void. Like there's not a really strong way to get bicycle and pedestrian data. It's even changed even in the last year or two because of the ability to get data from mobile apps because of new privacy laws. There's, many things there. So what we shifted towards saying is, where is the potential for everyday biking and walking if there were safe and comfortable walking facilities? We're not saying how many people will walk there or how many people are biking there today. We're saying that we know that the majority of trips are short trips. We know that the majority of then potential, looking at that kind of quarter, half mile for walking, 3 miles for biking. If based on land use and destinations, if we're working on a project or we're working in a location where there's, 2 destinations, whether it's a hotel and a, coffee shop across the street, or residences or school, or you name it, any destination that constitutes, as a place where there's potential for walking and biking. And then that, that helps inform, what we put in place. I did send a link in the Q&A to that methodology and a little bit more information. I will note that the methodology we first released in 2019 was based on a certain set of data. We updated it in 2022 with new data. Some of that data no longer exists anymore because it came from like kind of some big data sources. So I don't know what the potential for everyday walking and biking will look like again in 2 years from now when we rerun it. But we are doing a data analysis at the moment that anyone could do. We're just looking at where our roadways are today, and we're looking at land use codes and based on existing development, where do we need walking and biking facilities based on those trip distances. So we're trying to like simplify it extraordinary. We are not trying to overcomplicate and do very sophisticated modeling. This is, if you have a neighbor who lives, within a quarter of a mile, can you walk there?
Thank you. We're running up on the end of our time together, unfortunately, but I did want to ask everyone one more question, and that is sort of for the agency that may be considering doing similar work like this, that beginning that process of assessing internal practices and looking to make some changes. Do you have recommendations of where that person might want to start, or where that agency might want to start initial conversation, a partnership to develop those sorts of things that you found to be successful, maybe in your work? Maybe Jackie, you could start, and then we can go around the room.
Well, first of all, I would channel something that Carrie was saying, which is like, you don't know until you're in it. So just start somewhere. And I don't think, from that graphic of actual experience, just start somewhere, and then I would like, which wave can you catch? Is there a training program and you're actively being developed and you can help inform what content is in there? Is there guidance being updated, and how do you slip in a question about, okay, well, when we do this part of the, this guidance, or if there's a standard operating procedure that's being updated. So I would kind of look for those waves. It doesn't always come down top down. It doesn't always come perfectly bottom up. I would say look for those, look to catch a wave and see where there's momentum, see where something is being updated, talked about, and integrate safety and complete streets questions like into those processes, and then just get started and go from there. It sounds like we have a nice linear story, but we don't.
No, you made that very clear.
About the actual experience anytime.
Yeah, totally. Gary, Natasha, any parting words, wisdom?
I would say it shouldn't necessarily be top down, right? I mean, I think anyone can come in and try to lay down, this is what we're going to do. I think what I found is I got the buy-in here from our team at ConnDOT by allowing them to come up with, I laid out what my priorities were, and then they came forward with the approach as to how to achieve those priorities. And I really, I was just ecstatic when they came forward and presented it to me. And it really was great to see. And so, finding those champions inside the agency, having them posing the challenge to them to come up with an approach that can achieve the goals and the priorities of the agency seemed to have worked best in our case. And I guess, when in doubt, roundabout is my also closing remark.
That's a good one. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your stories, and we know no two states are alike, and the other 48 may not do things exactly the same, but I think we've provided some really solid ground for inspiration for sending others on this path as well. So thank you for your time today. Becky, any closing words? I think we've reached our maximum enthusiasm level with some of this. I'm pretty excited about it.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody too. It was a great webinar. Love all the questions. But great job, folks. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. We'll be sending out some more information, so stay tuned for that. In the chat, you'll see a link to a post-webinar set of questions. We'd love to hear from you about those. Thank you again, and we hope to see you next time. Bye, everyone.